Last time we talked, the United States was going through an era of unprecedented prosperity. People were making more money, wages were dramatically increasing. The U.S. was the leader in manufacturing, finally overtaking Britain on the world stage. Just about all Americans were doing much better off than they had in previous years. And Americans credited political leadership with this change. As we talked about, Warren G. Harding and then Calvin Coolidge had instituted these new policies that reduced taxes on the wealthy significantly. The idea was to encourage investment. They'd encourage trade associations where you had businesses get together, essentially price fix, so the businesses could grow. And you had deregulation. Essentially, they took out money going to things like the Federal Trade Commission to encourage businesses to increase in size. And seemingly this worked. Americans are going to credit the Republican Party with bringing about this prosperity. As we talked about, Herbert Hoover is going to win the 1928 presidential election substantially as Secretary of Commerce for Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge is going to credit him with bringing about this economic change. And it looks like things are going to keep getting better. The stock market's going up, wages are going up, and things are going to always be great. And as a matter of fact, we heard Herbert Hoover talk about the end of the poorhouse will be among us very soon. Well, as we all know, things are not going to be great forever. And what we're going to see is the market is going to collapse out from underneath the United States in 1929, and the U.S. will go through this decade of economic downfall. Essentially, the U.S. is going to have high unemployment. It's going to shut down these industries that had opened up in the 1920s, and we're going to see people lose confidence in the market. How and why does this happen? What causes the Great Depression? Well, there's a lot of different people that make suggestions for what caused the Great Depression, and it's really hard to get our hands on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out a couple underlying causes of the Great Depression. Again, not all of them. You know, there's some other people that suggest a thing or two that I won't mention. And then I'm going to put out the specific direct causes of the Great Depression. But maybe the best way to think about this Great Depression is the U.S. has this great economy in the 1920s, but it's built on some shaky foundations. So imagine the U.S. economy being this huge skyscraper. It keeps growing bigger and bigger, getting closer to the sky. But underneath this, it's held up by some sort of logs or something like that that have termites. It's a really shaky foundation. And what we're going to see is that in 1929, something will happen to kick out those logs, or basically maybe there's dynamite and you just toss it at the bottom of this building, and then you're going to see the economy collapse upon itself. So think about the economy of the United States as growing, but the foundations of the economy have a number of problems. And when these problems start emerging, we're going to see that's just going to take one thing to shake the foundations loose, and everything's going to collapse. All right. So what caused the Great Depression? What are some of these underlying causes? Well, one of the things a lot of people point to is the fact that the United States in the 1920s, everybody was doing well, or not just about everybody was doing well, but you're going to have the people at the very top doing much better than other people. What you're going to see in the 1920s is an over-concentration of wealth. So while wages are going up and more people are putting money in their pocket, buying new items, things like that, the guys at the very top, the business owners, the guys that are invested in the stock market, the people that are buying factories, owning factories, that type of thing, they're going to be making a lot more money than the average American. And this wealth gap is going to increase substantially in the 1920s. Now, we talked about part of the reason for this is this dramatic reduction in the progressive income tax. So we had this new progressive income tax introduced at the end of Taft's administration, only 2% of the wealthy, but that had gone up significantly under Woodrow Wilson. But then during Coolidge's administration, it had dropped down significantly. And again, the idea was to encourage investment. And it had to an extent, but it also gotten a lot of wealthy. Instead of putting this taxes, towards the government or investing it, some people had started sticking it in their pockets, getting wealthier. And what we saw is this gap start growing between the extremely wealthy and the average American, okay? Now, you always are going to need investors. You need some people to have more money than other people. You need people to start the factory, buy the business. That's just economics. That's kind of the way that capitalism works. But if you start seeing the gap grow big enough, you're eventually going to get to the point where you're not going to have the people at the bottom aren't going to be able to afford the products that this guy's producing in his factory. So you need somebody to build the factory, but you also need somebody to buy the products of the factory. Now, early in the 1920s, with wages increasing, people are going to be buying things. But as we're going to talk about towards the end of the 1920s, inflation starts to go up higher than wages start to go up. So wages are going up, but the prices of goods are going higher than wages. So, as your wages going up, you're buying a candy bar for $1, and your wage increases 30%. That's great. But what if the price of the candy bar doubles to $2? Now, those aren't exact numbers, but you're not going to be able to afford as many candy bars. Now, the guy that owns a factory that produces the candy bars, he's not able to sell as much. And we're going to see this isn't going to be a problem throughout the 1920s, but towards the end, we see inflation start increasing greater than wages, okay? So, in the wealth gap increase. So you can think of this as an over-concentration of wealth. We have these fat cats, like this guy right here, are going to have more of the money than the general population. The general population is not going to be able to buy the products that these fat cats produce. So that's one sort of shaky thing. An increase of wages, but it doesn't match inflation, and we have an over-concentration of wealth along with that. Another factor that's going to be at the sort of the root of the economic problems in the United States is that while most Americans are experiencing prosperity, there's a section of the American public. Now, this is a minority of the American population at this point, beginning right around 1920, 1910, something like that. Farmers are not going to be experiencing the economic growth that we see in the industrial sector. So Americans working in factories, their wages are going up. Farmers are going to keep doing poorly. Now, we've talked about this since the end of the 1800s. Farmers increasing debt. There've been some things like decreased government decreasing railroad prices railroads can charge, the automobile making it easier to get products to market that have helped farmers. But in the 1920s, farmers still have this problem that had plagued them since the late 1800s. That is overproduction. American farmers essentially too good at their job. They produce more than the market demands, so you have this dramatic supply. You get, the market demands 100 tomatoes, farmers produce 200. That means when the price of tomatoes gets to market, then people aren't going to buy as many or they're going to pay low prices for them because there's simply more than people will be willing to pay for. So that means that farmers are going to get a very small amount of money back in return. Now, how do you deal with this overproduction? This is something that's been plaguing farmers since the late 1800s, early 1900s, and a solution hasn't presented itself, or at least the government hasn't been willing to introduce a solution in the 1920s. So this means farmers continue to produce too much, and they continue to be poor. So you have this segment of the population that isn't enjoying the wealth that the others are. And that's always a problem in when you're talking economics. Another issue that's going to be facing the United States, and this is something that I can only really describe as funny stuff with money in Europe, okay? So the United States had loaned out a lot of money to international countries in Europe during World War I. They'd gotten a lot of this money back in return. Well, the United States and U.S. investors are going to continue to do well in the 1920s, and they're going to continue to loan money internationally. And one of the countries they're going to be loaning money to is Germany. So the German government will be heavily in debt following World War I. You can imagine that being the case. You're spending all these money on soldiers, tanks, that type of thing. And then at the end of the war, in the Treaty of Versailles, you're told you have to pay these reparations to Britain and France. So Germany's got $33 billion in debt to Britain and France at a time when they need to rebuild their economy, and they're in debt from the war already. So you have Germany defeated after this war. They need to build new roads, schools, things like that, but they can't afford to do that with tax money because that tax money is essentially going to Britain and France. So what the German government will do in the 1920s is they're going to borrow a lot of money they need from investors in the United States. Okay, so these investors in the United States, they're going to send this money to Germany, or a lot of times they don't even really send the money to Germany. They just basically say, here's this money, it's on the books, here's $1 million or whatever. Well, Germany will then go to Britain and France and basically with this pretend money pay back the reparations they owe to Britain and France. And then Britain and France, their government will essentially write checks to U.S. manufacturers or whoever with this fake money. So like, okay, we the British government need some new Jeeps or something. U.S. auto industry, you're doing better than us. Can we purchase some Jeeps with this $1 million? Now, it's way more complicated than I'm portraying it here, but basically you have investors loaning people money in Germany, Germany giving this money to Britain and France as reparations, Britain and France and buying products from the United States. And you have this sort of weird situation where you have this transfer of money where you don't have a transfer of money. It's almost fake money. Like on paper, it only exists on paper. Now, this can work hypothetically, but if one of the chains breaks and one person can't, loan the money or pay the other person back, then we're going to see that's a problem. So just for simplicity's sake, let's say that funny stuff is happening with money in Europe and the United States, okay? All right, so farmers not as left out of the economy, fat cats, funny issues with money in Europe. Another thing that's going to be plaguing the United States in the 1920s is that a lot of the economic growth is based on the fact that people are buying on credit. So for the first time in U.S. history, we start to see credit cards. So people go out, and we do this today, obviously, can't afford an item at the moment, but you really want this thing, you need this thing, you go in, you purchase it on credit, and you pay it back when you get a paycheck, okay? Now, if you're responsible, you pay it back right as soon as you get your paycheck, but a lot of us, we just pay off a small portion, and we have to pay it back with interest, so the credit card company's making money off interest from us, but hey, we really need this item. Well, what a lot of Americans do in the 1920s is they're making an increase in wages, so wages are going up, and I'm just going to play with numbers here. Let's say you're making $100 in 1922, but then you get a pay increase to $110 1923, and then $120 1924, $130 1925. Let's say your wages go up 10% every year, and you're buying more stuff with the increase in wages. But let's say 1925, we just got 3 years of 10% wage increases, and we really want a new refrigerator, but we can't fit it in our budget at the moment, but this nice new item, and a lot of new commercial items are going to be coming out in the 1920s that people hadn't seen before, like refrigerators, irons, stuff like that. You really want this item, but you don't have enough money, but you kind of assume that you're going to have enough money next year because you keep getting this wage increase. So I'll go ahead and take out a credit card, I'll get a loan, I'll buy my new refrigerator with the idea that I'll pay it back next year, because of course I'm going to be able to pay it back next year because I'm going to get a wage increase, because that's the way things have been working up to this point. So you take out this loan, and next year comes along, you do get this pay increase, you pay off the credit card, that's fine. Well, maybe you decide I want to get a new automobile. A lot of more people are buying cars, so you do the same thing, and you buy this automobile, and again, expecting your wages to continue to go up. So a lot of people start buying on credit as wages increase. It's almost it almost sounds like an oxymoron. Making more money, why would you go on credit? But it's sort of a thing we as people do. If we make more wages, we expect wages to go up, so we keep buying more. Well, this is fine as long as wages continue to go up, but if things go down, now you're not able to pay off that credit card bill. This person that loaned you the money, the credit card company or the bank or whoever, they're not going to be able to pay back the people that are investing in them, or the people that put the money in the bank, and this is going to become an issue. It's not an issue as long as wages continue to go up, But if they go down or if there's a dip, then it can become a problem. So just think about this as part of this shaky foundation. A lot of people buying on credit more than they have ever done before. And we're going to see buying on credit increase even higher than the GDP. The gross domestic product will increase. Private debt goes up at a higher rate than the GDP, which is something that's not a problem again until there's a dip in the economy. All right, so all these things by themselves aren't problematic, but if altogether, something happens and altogether they could become a major factor. Well, the something that is going to turn them into a major issue with the economy is going to be something that happens on Wall Street in 1929. So we haven't talked much about Wall Street. We haven't talked much about stocks in this class, but we all know the basic principle of the stock market. When you buy a stock, what you're essentially doing is you're buying a portion of a company. So if you go pay $300 or whatever it is for an Apple stock, you own 1/1,000,000th of Apple. I don't, again, know if those are exact numbers or anything. You go buy a stock in Tesla, you own 1/100,000th of Tesla. And if Tesla does well, their new electric car model sells like crazy, you're going to do well because the price of the stock is going to go up. More people are going to want to be involved in the company, and you can basically turn around and sell your share of the company to somebody else. So you buy a portion of the company, and if the company does well, your stock price goes up. And the way the stock market's supposed to work is you're going to be buying stocks from, or a percentage of a company from, a company you believe in, that has a product that you support and a product that you think is going to do well. So Tesla, you think that their electric cars are going to revolutionize the automobile industry. You think they're going to continue to sell them. This is a great company. I want a part of it. I buy the stock for that reason. And again, you're going to make money off of it, but you're mainly buying it because you believe in the product. Well, what happens in the 1920s is that a lot of people are going to get involved in the stock market, not necessarily because they believe in the product, but because they believe that the stock is going to continue to go up. And they'll buy the stock, again, not even knowing anything about the company, but they're going to buy it because the market's doing so well that they're going to see it as an opportunity to double, triple their money, something like that, okay? We see a lot of people start buying on speculation, all right? So in the 1920s, the stock market is going to be going through something we call a bull market, all right? So you have two different markets. You have a bear market. Bear market is when stock prices go down. So you imagine a bear coming in, swiping the stock prices down. That's when stock prices continue to go down, days, weeks, months, sometimes years, just continue to go down. A bull market, imagine you have a bull's horns and the bull is driving the stock prices up. Well, the 1920s are a bull market, okay? So if you look at the prices of stocks, they're going to dramatically increase from 1922, 1923, 24, really. This is sort of the this median year. But from that point forward, it's just straight up, okay? So if you buy a stock in 1924, you're going to double your money on just about any stock, on any company, in a period of, 3-4 years, something like that. That's fantastic. Today, if you told somebody you buy this stock, it's going to trip or double in 3-4 years, that stock would sell like hotcakes. Everybody would want to get their hands on it. And you're going to see, again, to bring that out another couple years, triple the price of your stock. So what happens in the 1920s is some people, and I should point this out, not very many people are involved in the stock market in the United States, especially at the beginning of the 1920s. This is really the guys at the top, the business owners, the people with expendable capital, which at the beginning of the 1920s wasn't a whole heck of a lot of people, but you got these very wealthy people. They're going to start seeing their prices go up, and you're going to start to see average Joe Schmo, man, this guy's doubling his money. I want in on this. They'll start buying stocks, and when you get more people buying stocks, it's going to drive the price up, and stocks are just going to continue up year after year. It's 1920s is a bull market. Things keep going up, keep it going up, keep going up. And again, that in itself isn't necessarily a problem. But what begins to happen in the 1920s is you're going to see a lot of investors who don't necessarily have the expendable capital to be buying stocks. So let's say you're average Joe Schmo and you buy, let's say 10 stocks for 50 bucks a piece, something like that, and you're doing well and you double your money in a couple years. But you say, man, I'm doubling my money, but if I bought 1,000 stocks, boy, it is making me a lot more money than just buying 10 stocks. But I don't have the money to purchase 1,000 stocks. How can I get it? Well, what some people will do in the 1920s is they're going to do something called buying on the margin. Okay, what buying on the margin is this guy who wants to get invested in the stock market will go to a bank. So banks, we have a different kind of definition of what banks are today. They're the people that we get our paychecks from. Company sends it there, we get it from there. We use it for ATMs. But the basic purpose of a bank is you put your money in the bank, and what the bank's supposed to do is take your money, loan it out to people with projects they believe in. So you stick your $100 in the bank. This bank then takes your $100 or $90 or your $100, however they want to do it, and it's going to give it to Steve. Steve comes in with a great idea for a restaurant that makes Hot Pockets. Okay, everybody wants Hot Pockets. Steve's got a great idea for a restaurant. The bank says, Steve, I think this is a great idea. Steve says, I just need $100 to start my Hot Pocket restaurant. The bank loans Steve this $100 with the idea that Steve, once his business gets going, will pay the bank back the $100 plus, let's say, $20 in interest. Then you get your cut of that $20 in interest. So when you go to pull your money out of the bank in a couple years, now you have $120 instead of $100. You get the money back in interest. You put your money in the bank then loans it out to somebody, bring it back in interest. Well, some of these people wanting to buy on the margin are going to go to banks to get a loan to buy stocks. Okay, so instead of Steve coming in with an idea for a Hot Pocket restaurant, you got Bob coming in, and Bob's idea is to buy 1,000 stocks. I want to buy 1,000 stocks in Ford Motor Company because and he shows the bank the numbers. Look, from 1924 to 1926, the price of the stock has doubled. I believe that the price of the stock is going to triple over the next couple years. So can you loan me $100, $1,000, or whatever? I'm going to buy the stocks, and then in 2 years, when the stock goes up, I'll pay you back the money you loan me plus interest. Well, the banks are going to crunch these numbers from these potential stock investors, and they're going to say, man, it really looks like this guy has a good idea. Here, I'm going to loan you the $100, $1,000, whatever. So the banks are going to start loaning money to people to buy stocks. Well, if the bank loans you money, the bank almost always wants collateral. So when Steve comes in for his Hot Pocket restaurant, the bank maybe will take his house as collateral. So if you don't pay back my loan, if your Hot Pocket restaurant doesn't work, we're seizing your house. That's basically the guarantee we're going to get our money back. Well, what about with these people buying on the margin? What's their collateral going to be? And by the way, if you think about this, if you took out a loan to get your car, to purchase a car, you're putting your car as collateral for the loan. Well, that's what's going to happen here with people buying on the margin. Basically, the banks will say, we'll loan you this money, but if we don't get our money back, we need collateral. Well, the people that are borrowing the money will say, well, what if I give you the stock as collateral? Okay, now this might be kind of complicated, but imagine they're taking a loan out for a car, and then they buy the car, and the bank, if they don't make their payments, can take the car. That's what's going to happen here with these stocks. So these people buying on the margin will get a loan out, and the bank's going to say, if you don't pay back the loan, we're taking the stocks from you. Okay? Well, nobody's even thinking about the collateral, because in the 1920s, again, looking at this chart, it looks like things are going to continue to go up. So no matter what, in a couple years, Bob is going to be able to pay back his loan with interest. So again, let's say he takes out the loan here, and the 5 years to pay it back. Well, he can easily pay it back with interest, because by 1927, not only has the stock price doubled, so he has his own money, he has the money to pay the bank back with interest. So of course they're going to be able to pay the money back. So the banks will start loaning out money and essentially loaning out people's life savings. Because again, this is money that Joe Schmo had put in the bank, um, uh, for them to invest, and then they're going to get back the interest. So, Bob, sure, here's the money. If you can't pay it back, we're taking the stock. But of course, you're going to be able to pay it back because stock prices are going up. So we get a lot of people invested in the economy in this way. Now, I shouldn't say a lot because it's maybe 3-4%. I've heard upwards of 5% of Americans get involved in the stock market. So it shouldn't point out that it's a lot of people, but the people that do get involved are going to heavily get involved, all right? Okay, so things are going fine in the 1920s until 1928, right into 1929. Things start to slow down slightly. Some people at the top, so imagine this as the big company owners, the guys that are building the factories, the investors, the people that own a lot of stocks, they start to notice that things aren't selling as well as they were a couple years before. Now, this normally wouldn't be a big deal. You always see these downward trends in the economy, and this is probably a result of, again, inflation rising higher than wages. Well, what's going to happen is some of these guys at the top are going to see the numbers pointing downward, and they have these stocks that are worth a lot of money. So, they had a stock that used to be worth $100, now it's worth $1,000, and they realize, hey, my stock's price is going to dip a little bit. Now, not a lot, not going to go all the way back down to $100, but it's going to maybe drop to $900, $800. I don't want to lose this $100, $200. So why don't I start offloading some of my stocks while it's at this high price? Still do this today. If you're investing in the stock market and you're at the top and you learn some information that things are going to start going downward, you're going to offload the stock while the price is still good. So we're going to see some people up at the top start offloading some of their stock, okay? And today they couldn't do this because they're going to be privy to information that is not available to the general public. Today, the SEC would say you've got to share this with investors before you can sell your stock, but this is a different time. We're leading up to the SEC. So these guys up at the top say, I'm going to get out while the getting's good. So they start offloading their stocks, and the people at the top are going to be fine with this. They get out, and they have a lot of people willing to buy stocks again because stock price is going up. So they start offloading things, and initially, they're able to offload them while the prices are still high. But then a lot of people start noticing, hey, there's JT Moneybags. He's offloading his stock. There's Joe, Penny Packer, he's offloading his stock. There's Sam, worth a lot of money, Ington, he's offloading his stock. So you start to see average Joe Schmo investor, Steve buying on the margin, start noticing the people at the top selling off their stock. What do you think they're going to start doing? They're going to basically say, those guys know something that I don't know, and then they're going to say, I'm going to start selling off my stock too. If these guys are getting out of the market, there must be something bad happening, so I'm going to get out too. So you're going to start to see not just the big guys, but average Joe Schmo want to sell their stock. Well, they're not going to be able to sell their stock because this guy's going to say, well, now everybody's selling their stock. So what happens is basically you're going to get a panic. You get a lot of people wanting to offload their stock. If everybody wants to get rid of their stock at the same time, what happens to the price of the stock? It's going to drop through the floor. So this stock that was worth $5,000, $1,000, if nobody wants to buy it, it's going to drop to $4,000. Then you're going to see even more people want to offload it. Now it's worth $3,000. Now it's worth $2,000. Now it's worth $1,500. Now it's worth $1,000. Everybody wants to sell at the same time, and so that drops the price of stocks, so the stock becomes worthless. Now, at this point, this is only affecting 1%, 2%, 3%, 5% maybe of the population with the stocks. Average Joe Schmo, 95% of Americans aren't in the stock market, so this isn't a big deal to them. Now, how will this end up affecting the average American? Well, the people that had taken the loans out, bought on the margin, now they have these stocks that they had thought was going up. Now these stock prices are worthless, and they're worth less than they had taken out the loan, when they took the loan out to buy them from the bank. Now they're going to be down to $0. So these guys are not going to be able to pay back the bank. Well, the bank is going to say, all right, well, fine. If you can't pay back my loan, I want the stock because you took the loan out with the stock as collateral. So now this guy, okay, well, that's fine. Here's this worthless stock. So these banks that had people's life savings loaned them out for people to buy stocks. The people that can't pay back the loan back are going to give the stocks back. So now instead of having a vault full of money, banks will have vaults full of these worthless stocks. So imagine you're somebody who hadn't had invested your money in the stock market, but you had put your money in the bank. Your money's essentially gone because the bank has loaned it out to these people buying on the margin, and now they just have these worthless stocks here. So what you're going to see almost immediately is something called a run on the banks. So right after the stock market collapse, some people are going to start going to the banks and they're going to say, hey, I would like my life savings. I put $1,000 in the bank. I want my life savings back. Maybe it's time to retire. Maybe the first couple people, fine, here's your money back. But then, and I'm just making up numbers here, 11th person comes through. Yeah, I put the money in the bank. I'd like to withdraw it. I'm going to retire. I'm going to go to Tahiti and retire. Well, the bank's going to look in its vault and it's going to say, yeah, I don't have that money. I loaned it out to this guy buying stocks on the margin. Stock market crashed. Now we just have these worthless stocks. You can have some of these. No, I want my life savings. This is gone. I loaned it out to somebody who didn't pay us back, and you're going to see a lot of people whose life savings are now lost. And what will happen with a lot of banks is people are going to rush into the bank. When they rush in, their first couple people get the money, and then, second, third, or 12th, whatever person, they come in, the money is simply gone. Banks have no money in their vault. You're going to see a number of banks actually close. I think it's something like 1,000 in 1930, 2,000 in 1931, as people withdraw their money, as banks can't pay people back because they've loaned their money out to people that aren't returning their investment. All right, so your average Joe Schmo, you were going to retire, or maybe you're going to use this money to buy an automobile. Now you've run out of the money. Your bank's closed. They took your money, essentially loaned it out. Are you going to buy an automobile? No, because you don't have expendable capital anymore because the bank loaned it out to somebody irresponsibly. So now you don't buy this automobile. Well, this is going to be a problem because less people buying automobiles. What's going to happen at, say, Henry Ford's plant? So, say 1928, they're selling 500,000 automobiles a year. Now, because people are losing their money because these banks are closing, nobody wants to buy an automobile, so now you've only got 2,000, or you're only going to be able to sell 100,000 automobiles, so you're producing 1/5 the automobiles. What's Henry Ford going to do at this point? Maybe he was considering opening a new factory. Are you going to open a new factory if you're not selling as many automobiles anymore? No, of course not. You're going to do that. What you might instead do is, if I'm producing less automobiles, I need less workers. So let's say you have Steve, Bob, and Tom. You're going to say to Steve, people aren't buying automobiles anymore. You're fired, okay? Now you have Bob and Tom. You still have your jobs. Bob and Tom were thinking about getting automobiles before this thing. Let's say they didn't have any money in the bank, but now they're looking around. They see Steve has just gotten fired. Are Bob and Tom going to buy their own automobiles if they're afraid they're going to lose their job? Of course they're not going to. And then that means that Henry Ford, maybe the next year, is only going to sell 50,000 automobiles because people are nervous that that they're going to get fired. So that leaves just Tom because, again, Bob gets fired because even less people are buying automobiles. So what happens with this is when the banks start shuttering, they stop loaning money out. So you're going to get less people investing, less people building new factories, less people building hot pocket restaurants, less people doing whatever. That's going to be a problem. You're going to see less people buying because their life savings is now gone. When people stop buying, the factories aren't going to need to produce as much. They're going to start laying off workers, and this is going to get people start tightening their pocketbooks instead of buying the new car, buying a new refrigerator. They're worried they're going to get fired, so they need to save the money for rent and for their family, so they're not going to buy. So that's going to get these factories to start laying off even more people. So you start seeing this cycle that starts with this panic, and you get people sort of panicking, and you're going to get a lot of people losing faith in the whole system altogether, okay? So stock market goes down, banks run out of money, banks stop loaning out money because they don't have it. People stop buying because the banks have lost their money. Then you start seeing cutbacks, people losing their jobs. Then even more people stop buying because they're afraid they're going to be the next one to lose their job, or they lost their job and they can't afford to buy anything. And this is going to get the factory owners to reduce even more, which is going to get people to save their money even more. And essentially, you're going to have this downward cycle where you're going to see the bank system essentially collapse, and you're going to see the American public refuse to spend, and because they refuse to spend, you're going to see investors pulling back and cutting back and firing workers. This loss of faith in the economy is going to cause upwards of 33% of Americans to lose their jobs. So from 1929 to 1933, 25% to 33% of Americans will lose their job. Now, in 2008, we had a pretty hard recession. I think it was at its peak, something like 10% of people lost their jobs. This is 3 times that. This is 3 times as many people lose their jobs. You're going to see in the United States so many cutbacks. So this guy lost his money in the stock market. Here's the Dow Industrial Average. Again, when people start selling it off, you see this panic as people just start trying to get rid of their stocks as quick as they can. Here's a picture of running these banks. You hear that your bank is starting to run out of money. You have your life savings invested in it. You're going to run down and try to get your money out before the bank closes. Now, not all banks close. Some banks had not loaned their money out to people buying on the margin. A handful of banks had just made smart investments, and they're going to get a return on their money, but a good chunk of banks will close. So you get all these people losing their jobs, 25 to 33% of people. And what this is going to mean is that, let's say you had a house loan. You're unemployed, you can't pay for your house. The bank, if it's still around, even if it's not still around, it's going to make sure it gets return on its investment. It forecloses on your home. Now it's going to acquire your property because you took a loan out on it. Now you don't have a place to live. Well, what you'll maybe do is what the people here in this picture did, is you find an abandoned lot, and then you just put together homes made of basically trash. Hope so nobody throws you off this abandoned lot. And what you'll see is people set up these, what they're going to be called Hoovervilles, because as we'll talk about, they're going to blame it on Herbert Hoover. So you lose your homes, you lose your job, you lose your home. This is going to cause people to some sort of changes you wouldn't be able to immediately see. Divorce rates in the United States because of stress. If you don't have as much money, even if you haven't lost your job, you're afraid you're going to lose your job, you're not spending any money, that causes stress in marriage. So divorce rates are going to dramatically increase in this Great Depression that's hitting now. You're going to see that less people are going to get married. If you want to get married, you want to start a family, you need money. Well, you don't have the money because you're either out of a job or you're afraid you're going to be out of a job. Suicide rate is going to dramatically increase. From 1929 to 1933, the suicide rate is going to go up 40%. So 40% in just a period of 4 years. So that's going to be a thing that will happen here. People will actually start starving in a country that overproduces, where you see the surplus of agricultural products. People simply won't be able to afford food, and you have people actually starving to death in the United States. This is going to cause this just humongous change in the United States, and it's going to cause a change in the personality of the people that start experiencing this. So let's imagine you are somebody who lost their job, or even not that, if you're just somebody who's afraid you're going to lose their job, and just a couple years before you're buying all these different products, life was great, but now you have nothing. This is really going to cause people to start changing their habits. I always like to point out the example of my grandmother. She lived through the Great Depression, and you could see this in her personality. As a kid, I would go over to her house, and she would pour the cereal, and then she would go to cut up a banana to put in the cereal. But what she would go to cut up was no longer a banana. It was just this shriveled black thing that was filled with this goo that was used to be a banana at one point, but had ceased being a banana some weeks in the past. What she would also do, she would go to the fridge and she would go to make grilled cheese, and what she would pull out was no longer cheese. It was just this big green blob that had gained sentience, and she would cut all the mold off of it to get this tiny piece of cheese out of the center. You would go to my grandma's basement. There would be bottles everywhere. Anything that had a use beyond its initial purpose would be saved. Don't throw out anything. Garbage bags. We would go in the yard and clean up leaves, put them in these garbage bags. The garbage bags would have sticks poking out of them, things like that. And then we'd go to put the garbage bag in the trash can. She'd yell, like, "What are you doing? That we can use that garbage bag again." And then she'd have me shake out the leaves. And teaching over the years, I've heard so many different stories about very similar situations, because people here are afraid that they're going to experience this again, and they don't want to be without if they go through this again. So, in case the family can't afford something, in case this hits again, let's save this jelly jar because we could use it as a glass, because we might not be able to afford a glass in the future. So this is not only going to change people's perception towards the economy, it's going to change them personally. They really are going to experience this almost PTSD from just this dramatic unemployment. People aren't going to be spending money because they don't have money, or they're afraid they're not going to have money. And again, factories are going to close because nobody's buying anything. They can't afford it, or they're afraid they can't afford it, and that's going to lead to even greater unemployment. So you lose faith in the economy, and then the economy collapses even further. Well, how do you get out of this? What do you do? What do you do if you're a mother that lost her home? Maybe your husband committed suicide, something like that, and bank foreclosed on your home. You're sitting here in one of these Hoovervilles. Nobody's hiring because nobody's producing goods. You can barely make a living. You can barely feed your kids. How are you going to get out of this? Well, a lot of people are going to look to the government to get out of this, and a lot of people are going to look, particularly the national government. People look to local and state governments, but a lot of people are going to say to Herbert Hoover, Congress, the president and Congress, and say, hey, you took credit for the economy doing well in the 1920s. Well, now you need to take responsibility when it does bad. You need to fix this thing, national government. Again, we elected you because we thought you were responsible for the economy. If you are responsible for the economy, if you're going to take credit, you need to take blame as well. Fix this thing. So people, as the most powerful person in the United States, people will look towards Herbert Hoover to solve this. Well, the thing is, Herbert Hoover's solution to the Great Depression is going to be different than a lot of other people are going to want the government to deal with things. So, and this is going to owe to the fact that Herbert Hoover has a unique background. As a young man, he grew up a Quaker. He grew up in a Quaker community. If you don't know anything about the Quakers, it's this Christian sect of Christianity where the people are incredibly friendly and charitable. So, and they help one another. So if you go to a Quaker community, a neighbor, his barn gets struck by lightning and burns down. The rest of the neighborhood is going to come over that Saturday. They're going to help this guy build a new barn. They're going to put it up. So he experienced this as a young man. And then as a young adult, Herbert Hoover's going to get into business. He gets involved in mining. He starts these different mining companies that are going to make money, not just in the United States, but around the world. And part of the reason his company's going to do well is because Herbert Hoover kind of a workaholic, puts a lot of work, invests a lot of time into his companies, and this is going to help him thrive. So he goes from being a relatively poor kid to becoming this successful businessman, and he's going to develop this idea that he became successful through business, so he thinks America can become successful through business. So think of Herbert Hoover as coming from a charitable community, and he himself's incredibly charitable. I should point that out as well. He gives away a lot of his money to charities, and think of him as being all about business because business had helped him become a success. So in Herbert Hoover's mind, the way to help the United States out of this Great Depression is by helping charities and by helping business. Herbert Hoover does not believe that the government should be directly involved in the economy and helping the little guy out. Now, this is going to come from his Republican background. Republicans, as we talked about, Democrats had adopted this progressive economic attitude where it's up to the national government to help the little guy out, and support the little guy. Republicans hadn't gotten to that point. Their big business will help America. So Hoover does not want to give out handouts, doesn't want to directly help the American people with the government. He thinks the solution is use the government to help charities help people and use the government to help business to help people, but not direct government intervention. So how does he plan to do this? Well, one of his big things is going to be something called the Committee on Unemployment Relief, which he starts in 1930. So Congress is going to pass this legislation. Hoover will approve it. What the Committee on Unemployment Relief is, it's basically a government entity that will not directly support people, but it will help private charities organize support. So let's imagine let's not imagine, we got unemployment throughout the United States. In Michigan, you've got a lot of people losing their homes, and they're living in these Hoovervilles. And the big problem up there is that people are, say, missing coats. I'm just making this up, but missing coats. North Carolina, you have people that are unemployed, and you got Hoovervilles, that type of thing, but they don't have enough food. Well, let's say that you have these private organizations collecting goods in both areas. So Michigan, you have a community, things like the Christian Community Action, CCA, things like the, what's another big one? CCA, Catholic Church would be, another one that would be collecting charity from those who have something to give to those who do not. I'm missing another big one. There's one like the CCA that I usually use an example. But let's say up there you've got people that haven't lost their jobs that still have something. Catholic Church maybe passes out at church on Sunday, passes out a collection plate, collects money, and then it says, I'm going to give this whatever we collect to help out the poor. Same thing's happening down with the CCA in North Carolina. They're collecting items from people to support those that are unemployed. So you have these private charities trying to take care of things, but they can't because they're limited to their certain areas. North Carolina, CCA, up here, the Catholic Church up here in Michigan, they're not going to be able to address the needs of everybody. So let's say that in Michigan they collect a lot of extra food. They have more than enough food to feed people, but they don't have enough coats. But you have down here CCA collects a tons of coats. They don't need them as much in North Carolina, but they don't have enough food for people to run soup kitchens. So what's going to happen is this Committee on Unemployment Relief will basically tell these different private charity organizations, hey, your help could be used here. Hey, we could use coats here. Hey, we could use soup here. So it's not going to directly provide the food or directly provide the coats, but it's going to help churches, regular organizations, better provide the relief to the American people. Okay, so it's just basically it supports private charities. It helps private charities better get relief to the American public. All right, so this is one way Hoover's going to try to help, not directly helping the people, but helping private charities help the people. Well, another thing that Hoover is going to do is in 1930, he's going to, he and the Republican controlled Congress, in line with the thinking that business is the solution to getting out of this, he and Republican Congress will pass something called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. What the Smoot-Hawley Tariff is, it is the biggest tariff on incoming goods to the United States had ever had. All right, so we've had duties on incoming and outgoing goods throughout U.S. history. I mean, the U.S., when it first started, whenever goods came from Britain, there'd be a U.S. Duty collector sitting at the docks counting up how much goods are coming in and taking a percentage of it. So you got 10 British shirts coming in. They're going to sell for $10. We got a 10% duty. I'm taking $1 out of it. Again, just making up numbers. So whenever goods come into the United States, U.S. collects the duty on them. Same thing when they're going out. Well, what Hoover and Republican Congress believe is that we want American business to thrive, and we think that this can happen if more people buy only United States goods. So at this time, people are buying plenty of American stuff, but they're still buying goods from Britain, France, wherever. So what Hoover's going to say is that what if we get them to stop buying those goods almost entirely by putting a high duty when they come to the United States. So whenever the British shirts come in, instead of charging a 10% duty, I can't remember exactly, Smoot-Hawley Tariff's got a bunch of different numbers with it, but let's say instead we charge a 50% duty. So the cheapest this British shirt can sell at market is $15 instead of $10. Well, now the price is so much more than an American shirt, nobody's going to buy the British shirt because the American one's so much cheaper. So the thought process is that hopefully people will only buy American shirts, and when they buy these American shirts, the American shirt factory will start hiring people back and will get confidence back in the market. So basically, raise the price on incoming goods so much that it forces people to buy American. All right, you kind of hopefully understand that. So the Smoot-Hawley tariff is going to dramatically increase the duties on incoming goods, or incoming international goods. So sounds good at first thought, but what do you think Britain is going to do when the United States starts doing this to British goods? All right, so you're knocking the duty on our incoming goods up to 50%. We're going to do the same thing to Henry Ford's automobiles arriving in Britain. France, okay, you know, you're putting duties on French wine coming into the United States. Well, the second that American plastics, you know, this new industry, U.S. again, American plastics hit the dock in France, we're going to charge 50% duty on those. So in retaliation for the Smoot-Hawley tariff, you're going to see these various countries start imposing their own duties, and this is going to essentially shut down the market for American goods abroad. So what Hoover had intended to do was grow the domestic market for American goods, but instead he got these retaliatory duties pushed against him, and it basically shut down the market for international goods. A lot of people say the Smoot-Hawley tariff, well, everybody says the Smoot-Hawley tariff is going to make the Depression worse. Some people think that it's basically responsible for the Depression continuing as long as it did. Some people thought, you know, maybe the Depression would last a couple years, but the fact that you see this international retaliation will lead to an extension in it. Other people are going to, you know, other countries, by the way, are going to put their retaliatory duties not just against the United States, but other countries, sort of in a curling up effect. You know, let's keep our buy French or buy British. And some people say that this is responsible for spreading the Great Depression to other countries, because we will see that it will spread, and just about everywhere will start doing poorly as well. So Europe's going to start experiencing a Great Depression as well. All right. So, and by the way, if you hear a politician, very rarely do you hear politicians say buy American these days, in part because they're afraid that it's going to lead to these retaliatory duties that we're going to see like we see here. All right, so Hoover, we're not directly helping the people, we'll help charities, and all this is going to help a little bit. what we see with the charities is a lot of people are afraid to give to private charities because they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. So the Committee on Unemployment Relief is not going to have a lot of success. And the Smoot-Hawley tariff not only is not going to have a lot of success, it's going to be a complete failure, and it's going to extend the Great Depression. There are a couple other things that Hoover will do in an attempt to relieve the Great Depression. He does not want to throw government money into the economy for the purpose of creating jobs. He just thinks that's a waste. That's not what the government should do. But he does start some government projects, and they are going to put a couple people to work. Like we have the Hoover Dam in Nevada will be started, as a result of government, basically the national government, starting this project. But again, this is only one project. It's only going to put together a couple thousand workers to work. Not going to be a major jolt to the economy. You'll see local and state governments try to respond to this Great Depression. Again, this isn't going to be something local and state governments are going to be able to handle because the Depression's nationwide and essentially worldwide. And actually, the local and state solutions, sometimes these things are going to be problematic. Like in Texas, you see state government start trying to repatriate Mexicans who had come across in the 19-teens, 1920s as a result of the Mexican Revolution. As people losing their jobs, you get these complaints. Well, we have people that aren't even American citizens coming in, and you'll see these states essentially, and this is even without violating the 1924 Immigration Act, forcing Mexicans back across the border, sometimes even people that are born within the United States, in this idea to open up jobs for Americans, again, even though some people were Americans. This is right at the time you see LULAC created to sort of push back against this. So national government is not reacting in a way that's effective, in the way that people are going to like. So Herbert Hoover is not looking good going into the presidential election of 1932. Economy's gone in the toilet. His Committee on Unemployment Relief isn't helping people enough, and his Smoot-Hawley tariff has only made things worse. So Hoover's prospects for winning the presidency in 1932 are low anyway. They're going to get even lower in 1932 when there's going to be this incident with a group called the Bonus Army. All right. So in 1932, a number of World War I veterans are going to get this idea in mind that they're entitled to a bonus. So at the end of World War I, Congress had passed a bill that said in 1945, we're going to give World War I veterans $5,000. This was sort of a thanks for service, and the idea was in 1945 you get this $5,000 bonus. About that time is when World War I veterans would be retiring, so Congress thought it'd be sort of a nice thank you, and it's sort of a nice boost for people serving in World War I. So that's coming in 1945. Well, 1932, a number of these World War I veterans out of jobs, they can't feed their families, they can't pay their bills, they've had their houses foreclosed upon because you have such traumatic unemployment. Well, some of these veterans are going to get it into their mind that they would like that bonus early. So it's supposed to come in 1945, but I need this money now because my family's starving. So you will see this bonus army formed, and it's called the Bonus Army because we want our bonus now. Well, calls will go out. You see newspapers publishing essentially ads for this bonus army, and calls are going to go out for this bonus army to organize in Washington, D.C. to protest to get the national government to give them their bonus early. So not in 1945, we want it now. So all these people from throughout the United States, all these veterans, are going to show up in Washington, D.C., and they're going to set up camps. This would be Hooverville, or essentially a temporary camp of World War I veterans set up in Washington, D.C. And what they're going to do, the Bonus Army will do, is they're going to organize these daily protests throughout Washington, D.C., asking for their bonus. Okay, so again, if you're the national government, hey, we promised 1945, now's not the time. So you can understand why the government doesn't want to give them the bonus, but you can also understand the World War I veteran side of things. Your family's starving. You need money. Hey, can you give this to me now? You told me you're going to give it to me. I really need it now. But again, just a bunch of World War I veterans looking for support. Well, the thing is, Herbert Hoover does not believe that these people are World War I veterans, or at least his advisors do not believe that people leading the bonus army are World War I veterans. So Herbert Hoover is going to get some of his advisors, and they're going to suggest that this bonus army is not actually led by veterans. Instead, they're going to say this bonus army is led by communists. So we just talked about 1917, Russia goes into this revolution where this Workers' Party under Lenin, these communists, take over the country, institute this communist system where essentially, there's not a concentration of wealth. The state owns property and basically overthrew the government in support of these workers. Well, what his advisors are going to believe is that a type of group like had happened in Russia is now leading the bonus army, and they're going to say that this is kind of, to Hoover, this is going to be kind of scary because they're here in the Capitol and they're proposing to overthrow the government. Not really. Let me just say this right out. They're not actually communists. They are truly World War I veterans, but Herbert Hoover's advisors are going to suggest that they're communists. And what they're going to say is that if we don't do something about these guys, eventually they're going to march on the White House, or they're going to march on Congress, and they're going to use force to take it over. So these are army guys. They're led by communists. The communists are going to use them to direct at the national government, overthrow it, and institute this communist system, get rid of private property, and we'll have what happened in Russia. So Hoover's going to believe his advisors, and he's going to tell this Army general, a guy named Douglas MacArthur, I want you to deal with these guys however you see fit. So Douglas MacArthur and the mayor of Washington, D.C. are going to get together, the United States Army as well as Washington, D.C. police, and they're going to go in and they're going to essentially clear out the use force to clear out the bonus army. So this is a video from the time, but this is basically the U.S. Army going in to forcefully remove World War I veterans. This is tanks coming down the streets of Washington, D.C. To deal with these World War I veterans. So this would be a bonus army protest. You see these Washington, D.C. police basically, you guys got to get out of here under orders of the president. You got to leave. There'll be fights breaking out. As a matter of fact, something like, I know 2 for sure of the bonus army are killed here. I believe a significant number more are severely injured. And what the Army will do is it's going to go to these, Hoovervilles that are set up, and it's going to start using flamethrowers, things like that, to burn down these Hoovervilles. So now Herbert Hoover, this would be the aftermath of the Army coming through and burning down the bonus Army's camps. So now you're Herbert Hoover, and not only have you just responded poorly to the Depression, at least in the American public's eyes, not giving direct government relief, and your Smoot Hawley tariff made things worse. But now you've used the Army to attack World War I veterans. So if Hoover had a chance in the 1932 election, it's essentially been thrown away as his response to the bonus Army. Well, this is going to open the door for this guy to potentially win the presidency. This guy's name's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. A couple things about FDR before we talk about him running against Hoover in 1932. One thing is, FDR is a cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. Two are related, are both from this wealthy Roosevelt family. Franklin FDR knew Teddy Roosevelt growing up. So he's from this political family that's already popular in the United States. And in a lot of ways, FDR is going to resemble his cousin Teddy. They're going to be very similar. Childhood, very similar. Just like Teddy Roosevelt grew up wealthy, a rich family. He's going to be well educated, better educated than most Americans. He's going to go to school at Harvard, obviously very well educated there, participate in a lot of sports as a young man. So very similar in background. Political career is actually going to be very similar to his cousin. At one point, he's going to serve as Assistant Secretary of the Navy He serves under Wilson, which is again very similar to his cousin Teddy. Served as Secretary of the Navy under McKinley, so very similar in that way. Very self-confident like his cousin Teddy. So both of these guys believe themselves. Both are very optimistic as well. Both believe positively about humans. Think humans are good creatures fundamentally. So positive, educated, optimistic, very self-confident, very similar in those regards. FDR is also similar to his cousin politically. Both have a very similar political philosophy. Both believe in representative government democracy. Okay, both think that that is the superior form of government. So people go, they vote somebody into office, they represent them in Congress, they vote in a president. That's the way to do things. Now, I'm pointing this out because at the time we're going to see other countries, Italy, Germany, they're going to start setting aside democracy and putting in place different systems, totalitarian systems, dictatorships. FDR is going to explicitly say, no, I don't want any of that. Representative democracy is the best form of government. And you can imagine cousin Teddy would be saying the same thing if he were still around. FDR also believes in private property capitalism. Doesn't like communism, doesn't like socialism, says that's going too far. You can imagine, again, being a Roosevelt, obviously capitalism had done well from them. It made them very wealthy. So, of course, he's going to believe in capitalism. But like cousin Teddy, he also believes that you need to regulate capitalism. You can't let the guys at the top have everything. You need to step in and make sure that they don't pick the pockets of the little guy. So he's not a socialist, not a communist. He believes in capitalism. He just thinks you need to regulate it. Another thing that FDR believes, and you can see Teddy believe in this as well, he didn't believe the government should just hand out money. Now, as we're going to talk about, he's going to think the answer to the Great Depression is to use the government to directly provide relief, but he thinks this should come along with work. He doesn't think that people should just get handouts. He thinks that creates a dependency in society. Now, he thinks the government should help people, but he thinks people more need to help themselves. So he believes in individual welfare. So again, very similar to Teddy in these regards. Very similar upbringing, similar political philosophy, believes in democracy, Republican government, believes in private property capitalism, believes in individual welfare. Very similar in all those regards. He's different than Teddy in a lot of ways, though. So he's different in his political affiliation. So Teddy was Republican. As we talked about, Teddy had taken this Republican Party, up the progressive elements of it. But then in 1912, he'd broken away to form the Bull Moose Party. And after that, the Republican Party had gone back to its pro-business roots. So if you're like Teddy and you have the same political beliefs as Teddy, the only party around is the Democratic Party. Democratic Party since 1896 has been this use the government to help the little guy philosophy. It hasn't been as much on the social elements, so it's not been there to, we're staying away from women's rights as much as we possibly can. Again, you had the women's rights, women voting amendment go through, obviously, but we're not going to touch on the social elements unless we basically have to. In part, this is because the Democratic Party base has its base in the South, where civil rights mean that you have to start approaching race issues in the South. So I believe, and I'm pretty sure that most historians believe, that he does believe in the social elements of change. Government should provide the social elements of change. But he's not going to emphasize that because he's a Democrat. Democrats, help with the economy, help the little guy with the economy, not so much with the social issues. So he's different than Teddy in his political party, but this is because the Democratic Party is the only party around anymore that wants to deal with at least some aspects of reform, national government-based reform. So different political party than Teddy. He's also different in his approach than Teddy. So when Teddy would enter a room, he would get things done by being loud and boisterous. He would say, "Bully, what does you want?" And he'd sort of just go and physically be in your face and be optimistic and powerful, and he'd draw the room toward him, and that's how he got things done. Be louder than the next guy. FDR physically can't adopt that approach because as a young man, he contracts polio. Polio, this debilitating illness that you can lose control of parts of your body. This was what happens to FDR. Polio is going to ravage his legs to the point where he's not going to be able to walk without support. He basically has to ride in a wheelchair if he's going long distances. If he's going short distances, he's usually going to walk arm in arm with security or Secret Service, or maybe with a wife or a relative or something like that. Now he can stand, and walk short distances, but he's going to require a wheelchair. He's going to require a wheelchair if he's going any further than a short distance. Now, the interesting thing is, when he runs for president in 1932, this information is not going to be public. Whenever he makes an appearance in public, he's going to make sure that he's walking with a cane or walking with somebody, or he's standing on his own 2 feet. So he's going to specifically give the appearance that he hasn't lost a use of his legs. And this is because 1932 people have, these conceptions about the disabled, that they're not as capable as people who a full physical fitness, and so he doesn't want to give this perception that he's weak because the American public has this bias against people with disabilities. So in public he maintains this illusion. Now if you're somebody in Washington, I bet you probably knew around Washington, you probably knew the situation with FDR, but it's not going to make its way out to the general public. And it's kind of interesting, but the media is actually going to keep up this illusion. They don't report anything about him being in a wheelchair, anything like that. They keep that stuff quiet. But to the public, he sort of hides it, but in reality, he has difficulty walking for long distances. So because of this, he can't physically do what Teddy did. Teddy, again, right in people's faces. So what FDR, he's going to adopt this approach where he's very quiet. He's going to listen to everybody in the room, and after everybody's done speaking, he'll have calculated what he's going to say, and what he's going to say is not going to be a string of words, but instead very poignant and to the point. So whereas Teddy, mouth vomit, loud, FDR, a couple words, but they're well thought out, and they're sort of going to draw the attention because they're so eloquent. So very different approach to dealing with things than his cousin. So different political affiliation, different in approach. He's also different in how he's going to involve his family, in particular his wife, in politics. So Teddy's wife never really been involved in politics, sort of stayed behind the scene. That's not going to be the case with FDR. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, will be very integral to his administration and to his rise in politics. A little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt. One thing is that, kind of unusual, but her maiden name was Roosevelt. She was actually the, second cousin to FDR, but they got married. There's actually a little bit of social stigma to that back then, but it's not as much as maybe it would be today. Why they got married and are cousins, I mean, it's technically legal, I think, in a lot of states. I think second cousins, it's not as big of a deal. But there is going to be some question, why marry your second cousin? And the question is going to be even more pronounced because a lot of people, don't think these two belong together, because a lot of indications are they didn't like each other very much. Maybe early in life they liked each other, and that's why they got married. But later in life especially, there's going to be some contempt among them. There's going to be a lot of admiration, political admiration. They're both going to view each other as intelligent, but as human beings there's going to be a lot of disagreement. So what some people think is they liked each other at a young age, but then they liked each other's political affiliation, because like FDR and like Teddy, Eleanor believes use the government as an institute of change. But the thing is that FDR would cheat on Eleanor at a young age. There's a lot of proof that he slept with his own secretary. There's some proof that he slept with Eleanor's secretary. Eleanor didn't like him for that. You know, he'd slept around with her before that. There was actually talk when they were younger about getting a divorce, but Eleanor decided, I'm not going to do that. And we think that she didn't get divorced with him because she thought this would hurt his political career. So even though women had been making more gains politically by the mid 1900s, Eleanor is basically going to determine that if I divorced FDR, he's not going to achieve a position that he can help people. So if he gets divorced, this will hurt his political career. I believe in his politics. I may not like him as a man, but I believe in his politics because this is what I believe politically. So she stuck with him not because she liked him, but because she wanted him to do well, because he thought he had good political ideas. So Eleanor Roosevelt, very similar to her husband politically. She's actually going to be even more radical politically than her husband, and she's going to say things that FDR either wouldn't say or couldn't say. She's going to actually be vocal on race issues. FDR can't talk about race because his party base is in the South. Well, Eleanor, because she's his wife, what she'll do is she'll use this as basically, all right, he can't say these things, but I can. She's going to, when they become enter the presidency, spoiler alert, Eleanor will call for anti-lynching legislation. At one point during FDR's presidency, she wanted to have a black singer for one of her balls or something like that. And the place she was going to hold it wouldn't allow. It was a segregated facility, and they said, we're not going to allow her to come in the facility. So Eleanor canceled with that facility and instead held the celebration at the Lincoln Memorial, allowed the woman to sing. And so she's going to be incredibly strong. She's going to be incredibly progressive socially. FDR may have thought the same things as Eleanor on race issues and that type of thing. He couldn't say it because he's tied to the Democratic base in the South, but Eleanor could say it because she was, again, not the president. Now, a lot of Southerners are going to look at FDR and say, tell your wife to be quiet, but Eleanor's such a strong presence, you're not going to be able to keep her quiet. So there would be a lot of people in the Democratic Party that would say, thumbs up to FDR, but we don't like his wife. She needs to be quiet on the social issues. So in spite of that, FDR is still going to continue to make Eleanor an inaugural part of his campaign. And then when he wins the presidency, he's going to give her a lot of responsibilities that you don't see presidents, or you hadn't seen presidents give their wives before him. All right, so involved his wife in his campaign and later on his presidency more than anybody else. So 1932, you're going to have this guy versus Herbert Hoover. And what you're going to see is that these guys Republicans are going to renominate Herbert Hoover. Democrats are going to nominate FDR. And these guys are going to go out and campaign. Now, poor Herbert Hoover, what can you campaign on? You just, sick the army on World War I veterans. The economy's been destroyed. Your few actions have probably made the economy even worse. So Herbert Hoover's basically going to just have to go out and say, guys, I swear business is going to eventually get us out of here. We're going to continue the path ahead, but this isn't going to have a lot of effect on the American people. FDR, when people start asking him, how are you going to improve things, he's not going to actually say very much. All he'll do is he'll basically say, I'm going to provide direct government relief. I'm going to help the American people. He actually says, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people, a new deal between the government and the people, and I will provide direct government relief. Well, what does that mean? What exactly are you going to do? FDR doesn't say anything. He's actually incredibly quiet in his campaign, doesn't mention any specifics about this new deal of his. Why wouldn't he be specific? Why not say exactly what you're going to do? Well, because FDR realizes that if he says something controversial, it might lose votes. But if all he says is, I'm going to get direct government relief, I'm going to do better than this guy, he's going to win the thing because nobody wants to vote for this guy. The only way they're going to vote for this guy is you give him an excuse to. So FDR is going to be very quiet. and he's going to campaign on just, I'm going to do a better job than Herbert Hoover. Well, this is all he needs to do, because 1932 election, when the votes are counted, he wins a significant victory. So if you think back to Herbert Hoover's victory, where Hoover won everywhere but the Deep South, the only place that FDR is going to lose is a handful of places in the Northeast. It's a complete reversal of the 1928 election. So now we have this very different guy who's taken over the presidency, promised this New Deal. Next time we're going to find out exactly what this New Deal is.